The white room was cold and empty except for two metal chairs and one small table between them. Commander Park Jun walked into the room carrying a thick file folder in his hands. His boots made loud sounds on the hard floor as he moved toward the table where a young woman sat waiting for him. Private Kim Na-ri had been sitting in that same chair for 3 hours without moving. Her back was straight, and her hands rested flat on the metal table in front of her. She wore a clean, military uniform that looked too big for her thin body. Her left arm was wrapped in white medical bandages from her wrist all the way up to her elbow. June had seen many soldiers return from enemy prison camps over the past 3 years of war. Most of them came back broken and scared. They would cry during questioning or shake when they heard loud noises. Some could not sleep without having terrible dreams about their time in captivity. But Nari was different. She sat perfectly still like a statue, made of stone. The commander opened his folder and spread several papers across the table. Photos of destroyed alien ships, battle maps, and reports from other rescued prisoners filled the space between them. June studied Nara's face as he arranged the documents, but her expression never changed. Her dark eyes looked straight ahead at the wall behind him. 6 months ago, Nari had been captured during a failed attack on a Veltari supply base. The alien lizard creatures had taken her along with 20 other human soldiers to one of their prison camps deep in enemy territory. Most prisoners who went to those places never came back alive. The few who did return usually had broken minds or bodies that would never fully heal. 3 days ago, 18 human prisoners had somehow escaped from the same camp where Nari had been held. They had stolen an alien transport ship and flown it all the way back to human space without being caught by enemy patrols. It was an impossible mission that even trained special forces teams had never accomplished. Yet somehow these tortured prisoners had done it. The other 17 escaped prisoners had already been questioned and cleared for active duty. They told amazing stories of working together to overpower their guards and fight their way to freedom. All of them praised Nari as their leader and said she had saved their lives. But when the interrogators asked Nari to tell her own version of events, she simply refused to speak. June had read all the reports from the other survivors. They described Nari as fearless and brilliant during their escape. She had known exactly where to go and what to do at every step of their dangerous journey. But there was something in their stories that bothered him. The way they talked about her was strange, almost like they thought she had some kind of special power. The medical team had examined Nari carefully when she first arrived. They found no signs of alien technology implanted in her body. No brainwashing devices or mind control chemicals in her blood. Her physical injuries had healed normally, and her mental state appeared stable. Yet she refused to say even one word to anyone who tried to question her. June closed the folder and leaned back in his chair. He had been a military commander for 15 years and had interrogated hundreds of soldiers during that time. He knew how to read people and understand what they were thinking. But Nari was like a closed book, written in a language he could not understand. The war against the Veltari Empire had been going badly for humanity. The alien creatures had better weapons, faster ships, and more advanced technology than humans possessed. They also seemed to understand human psychology in ways that made them excellent at breaking prisoners and turning them into sources of information. Every human soldier knew stories about brave men and women who had died rather than give secrets to the enemy. These heroes had become legends that inspired new recruits to keep fighting even when the situation seemed hopeless. The military leadership used these stories to boost morale and remind everyone why they were fighting, but there were also darker stories that commanders tried to keep secret stories about prisoners who had been turned into double agents and sent back to spy on human forces. The Veltari were masters at finding each person's weakness and using it to control them. Some prisoners were tortured until they agreed to cooperate. Others were tricked with lies about their families being in danger. June suspected that Nari might be one of these turned agents. The timing of her escape was too convenient, and the success of the mission was too perfect. It seemed more likely that the Veltari had allowed the prisoners to escape as part of some larger plan to infiltrate human military operations. The commander picked up one of the photos from the table. It showed the wreckage of a human battleship that had been destroyed in the attack where Nari was captured. Over 300 soldiers had died in that battle, including many of June's personal friends. The sight of the twisted metal and burned hull plates made his anger start to rise. June looked directly at Nari and spoke in a firm voice that echoed off the white walls. "Private Kim, you have been silent for 3 days while your fellow soldiers return to active duty. The war is not waiting for you to decide when you want to talk. People are dying every day while you sit here like a broken machine." Nari did not react to his words. Her breathing remained steady, and her hands stayed perfectly still on the table. The only sign that she had heard him was a slight movement of her eyes as they shifted to look at his face for just a moment before returning to stare at the wall. The medical reports say you are healthy and ready for combat duty. June continued, his voice getting louder. Your body shows no signs of alien tampering or torture devices. Your mind appears to be functioning normally. So what is your excuse for this behavior? Why are you acting like you have forgotten how to be a human soldier? Still no response from Nari. June felt his frustration growing as he watched her sit there like a statue. He had expected tears or anger or fear, but instead she gave him nothing. Her silence was more disturbing than any words could have been. Your fellow prisoners have told us how you led them to freedom, June said, trying a different approach. They say you were brave and smart and saved all their lives. They want to recommend you for medals and promotions. But how can we honor a soldier who will not even speak to her? Commanding officers. Nari shifted slightly in her chair, and for a moment June thought she might finally say something, but then she settled back into her previous position and continued staring at the wall. Her wrapped arm rested on the table like a white bandaged reminder of whatever had happened to her in that alien prison. The commander felt his patience finally run out. He stood up quickly, making his chair scrape loudly against the floor. His hands slammed down on the metal table with a sound like thunder in the small room. Papers scattered and some fell to the floor. "Damn it, Private!" June shouted, his face turning red with anger. "Act like a soldier. Your comrades are out there fighting and dying while you sit here playing games. I do not care what those alien monsters did to you in that prison. You are human, and humans do not give up like this." For the first time since entering the room, Nari moved with purpose. Her hands reached for the bandages on her left arm and began slowly unwrapping them, layer by layer. The white medical cloth fell away, revealing pale skin underneath. But as more bandages came off, June could see there was something else there. Something that made his breath catch in his throat. When the last bandage fell to the floor, Nari held up her bare arm for June to see. Burned deep into her flesh was a complex symbol that he recognized immediately. It was the official insignia of the Veltari Empire, branded into her skin with perfect precision. Every line and curve of the alien mark was now a permanent part of her body. The brand was still red and angry, looking as if it had been burned into her arm only weeks ago. The alien symbol seemed to glow under the harsh white lights of the interrogation room. June stared at it in shock, unable to believe what he was seeing. Then Nari spoke for the first time since her return. Her voice was quiet, but steady as steel as she looked directly into June's eyes. "You want me to act like a soldier, Commander? This is what a soldier looks like when she refuses to break." Commander June leaned forward in his chair, trying to understand what Nari meant when she said the aliens had wanted them to escape. The idea seemed impossible. The Veltari were known for their strict control over prisoners and their advanced security systems. No alien commander would willingly allow 18 human captives to steal a ship and return to enemy territory. Nari rolled up her sleeve again, exposing the branded symbol on her arm. The red mark seemed to pulse under the bright lights of the interrogation room. After they burned this into my skin, something changed in the way I acted around the guards and prison staff. I started doing things that made them uncomfortable and confused. She explained how she had carefully studied Veltari behavior during her months in captivity. The alien creatures were logical and methodical in everything they did. They relied on predictable patterns and expected responses from their prisoners. A human who was tortured should either break and become cooperative or remain defiant until they died from the abuse. But I gave them something they could not understand or categorize, Nari said with that cold smile that made June's skin crawl. I started staring at the guards for hours without blinking. I would smile at random moments during interrogation sessions. I would whisper human lullabies in their own language when they thought I was unconscious from pain. These behaviors had been carefully calculated to exploit the weaknesses. In Veltari psychology, the aliens prided themselves on understanding the species they conquered. They had detailed studies on human behavior and knew exactly how prisoners should react to different types of torture and pressure. When Nari began acting in ways that did not match their scientific predictions, it created confusion and doubt among the prison staff. The guards started reporting strange incidents involving the branded prisoner. The medical staff could not explain her unusual behavior patterns. The facility commanders began receiving requests for guidance on how to handle this unprecedented situation. They started calling me the Marked One in their official reports. Nari continued. Some of their scientists wanted to study me to understand what the branding process had done to my mind, but every test they ran just made them more confused and worried about what they had created. The confusion began spreading through the entire command structure of the prison facility. Veltari officers who had never shown fear or uncertainty before started having heated discussions about the branded human prisoner. Some believed she had been damaged beyond normal parameters. Others worried that the branding process had somehow connected her mind to their technology in dangerous ways. I made them believe that burning their symbol into my flesh had changed something fundamental about my brain. Nari explained that the brand was not just a mark of ownership, but some kind of link between human consciousness and Veltari systems that could be dangerous to their operations. The other prisoners she had selected for the escape were carefully coached on how to display similar symptoms. Each one began showing the same strange behaviors that Nari had pioneered. They would stare too long at guards, smile at inappropriate moments, and demonstrate knowledge they should not possess. To the logical minds of the Veltari, this appeared to be some kind of psychological infection spreading through their prisoner population. The branded human seemed to be somehow transmitting her altered mental state to other captives through unknown means. This violated every scientific principle they understood about human psychology and neural function. You made them afraid of their own success, Commander June said slowly, as understanding began to dawn on him. They thought branding you had created something they could not control or predict. Exactly, Nari replied, her eyes glowing. With satisfaction, fear makes even the most logical creatures do illogical things. The Veltari had always prided themselves on their scientific approach to prisoner management. But when faced with something that did not fit their models, they began to panic. The prison commanders started implementing new security protocols specifically designed to prevent contact between the marked prisoners and the rest of the facility population. But this only made the situation worse because it suggested that even the aliens believed something contagious was happening. Reports began filtering up through the Veltari command structure about a possible containment breach at the prison facility. Some officers recommended terminating all the affected prisoners immediately. Others argued that studying them might provide valuable information about human neural adaptation to alien technology. While the aliens debated what to do, Nari and her team were making final preparations for their escape. The confusion and fear she had created provided the perfect cover for their activities. The guards were more focused on watching for signs of infection than on preventing escape attempts. The night we broke out, Nari said the facility staff was in complete chaos. Half the commanders wanted to evacuate the entire prison. The other half wanted to lock down everything and begin emergency sterilization procedures. They were so busy arguing among themselves that they barely noticed us taking over the transport bay, but the most brilliant part of her plan was still to come. The escape itself was just the beginning of a much larger psychological operation that would have consequences far beyond the prison walls, Nari had been thinking. Several moves ahead, like a master chess player setting up a checkmate that her opponents could not see coming. When we stole that transport ship and flew it back to human space, we were not just 18. Escaped prisoners returning home, Nari explained. We were carrying something much more valuable than intelligence about alien prison systems. We were carrying a story that would change how both sides thought about this war. The story was already spreading through human military networks. 18. Prisoners had escaped from an impossible situation led by a soldier who had been branded with the enemy symbol but had somehow turned that mark into a source of power rather than shame. The details grew more amazing with each telling. Every human soldier now knows about the prisoner who was branded but refused to break. Nari said, every Veltari commander has received reports about marked humans and the strange behaviors that might be spreading through their facilities. The psychological impact is already changing how both sides approach prisoner operations. June felt a mixture of admiration and unease as he processed the full scope of what Nari had accomplished. She had not just escaped from prison, she had created a myth that was reshaping the entire war through pure psychological manipulation on a strategic level. But there was something else in her expression that suggested the story was not over. The way she spoke about ongoing effects and spreading influence indicated that her mission had not ended with the successful escape. There were still moves being made in this complex game she had started. The other prisoners who escaped with me, Nari said quietly, they are not just survivors anymore, Commander. They are true believers. They genuinely think something supernatural happened during our captivity, that the branding process connected us to Veltari technology in ways that give us advantages over the enemy. This belief was spreading through human forces. Like wildfire, soldiers were volunteering for dangerous missions in hopes of being captured and potentially marked themselves. The idea that torture and branding might actually grant special powers was reshaping human tactics and morale in ways no military strategist had ever imagined. Are you going to tell them the truth? June asked, wondering if she would reveal that everything had been carefully planned. Psychological warfare, rather than some mysterious transformation. Nari looked at him with those burning dark eyes and smiled. What truth, Commander? That I planned everything, or that 18 human prisoners accomplished something impossible through determination and intelligence? Both versions are true, depending on how you choose to look at the situation. The branded symbol on her arm seemed to glow brighter under the harsh lights, as if responding to her words. June realized that he was looking at something far more dangerous than a simple escaped prisoner he was facing. A soldier who had weaponized her own suffering and turned enemy torture into a strategic advantage for humanity. 1 year after Neyrus' escape from the Veltari prison camp, the war that had seemed impossible for humanity to win was ending in ways that no military strategist on either side had predicted. The final battle was not being fought with weapons or ships, but with ideas and beliefs that had grown far beyond their original scope. Commander June stood on the observation deck of the human flagship, watching as Veltari vessels approached under flags of truce. The alien fleet moved slowly and carefully, as if their commanders were still uncertain about the wisdom of this unprecedented negotiation. The war was ending not because one side had defeated the other through superior force, but because the fundamental nature of the conflict had changed. The peace negotiations had taken 6 months to arrange, and another 3 months to complete. The Veltari Empire was agreeing to withdraw from all contested human territories and establish permanent borders that gave humanity control over twice as much space as they had possessed when the war began. The terms were far more favorable to humans than anyone had dared to hope for when the fighting started. The aliens were essentially admitting defeat without having lost a single major battle or strategic position. Their decision to surrender was based entirely on psychological factors that their leadership could no longer manage or understand. Nari had been promoted to the rank of colonel and placed in charge of all psychological warfare, operations for the human military. Her insights into Veltari behavior patterns had proven so valuable that enemy commanders now avoided engagements in any sector where she was known to be operating. The 17 other survivors from the prison camp had become legendary figures within human space. Each of them commanded units that were considered elite forces, capable of achieving objectives that conventional soldiers could not accomplish. Their success rates in combat operations had reached levels that seemed almost supernatural. But the most important changes were happening in the minds and hearts of ordinary human soldiers throughout the galaxy. The story of the marked prisoners had evolved into something far more powerful than its original facts. Young recruits joined the military, believing they were part of a species that could not be broken or defeated by any enemy. This belief had created a self-reinforcing cycle of success and confidence. Human forces achieved better results because they expected to win. Their victories reinforced the legend of human superiority, which inspired even greater efforts and more dramatic successes. The psychological momentum had become unstoppable. The Veltari, meanwhile, were struggling with the complete collapse of their understanding of human psychology. Their military doctrine had been built on scientific studies that proved humans could be controlled and defeated through systematic application of fear and pain, when those methods not only failed but actually strengthened human resistance. The entire foundation of Veltari strategy crumbled. Their commanders were forced to operate without reliable predictions about enemy behavior. This uncertainty spread through their ranks. Like a disease undermining discipline and effectiveness at every level, intelligence reports showed that Veltari military academies had stopped teaching courses on human psychology because the previous theories had proven so completely wrong. New alien recruits were being warned that humans were unpredictable and dangerous opponents who might become more powerful when subjected to torture or imprisonment. The most dramatic evidence of Veltari fear came from their diplomatic communications, where alien negotiators specifically requested that any peace agreement include provisions preventing the creation of additional marked humans. They were willing to give up significant territorial and resource advantages in exchange for guarantees that the marking phenomenon would not be used as a weapon against them. June found Nari in her private quarters the night before the final peace ceremony. She was sitting by a window, looking out at the stars with her branded arm resting on the table beside her. The alien symbol had healed completely, but remained clearly visible as a raised white scar against her skin. "Any regrets about how this all turned out?" he asked as he joined her at the small table. Nari smiled and shook her head. "This mark was supposed to be proof of their power over me," she said, tracing the lines of the brand with her finger. Instead, it became the symbol that ended the war. Every human in the galaxy knows what it represents, and every Veltari fears what it might do. The brand had indeed become the most recognizable symbol of the war. Human soldiers wore replica patches on their uniforms, and citizens displayed the design on flags and banners throughout human space. It represented not the acceptance of defeat, but the transformation of suffering into strength. Tomorrow, the Veltari Empire would formally surrender and withdraw their forces from human territory. The peace treaty would establish humanity as a major power in the galaxy, with resources and territory sufficient to support expansion for generations to come. But the most important victory was not territorial or economic. It was psychological. The war had proven that humans possessed qualities that their enemies could not understand or counter. The capacity to turn torture into determination, fear into courage, and defeat into ultimate victory. The marking phenomenon had spread far beyond its original 18 participants. Thousands of human soldiers now claimed to possess enhanced abilities gained through various forms of contact with alien technology. Whether these abilities were real or imagined had become irrelevant to their effectiveness. What mattered was that an entire species now believed in its own superiority over alien opponents. This confidence was reshaping human society in ways that would have consequences far beyond the immediate military conflict. Young people were choosing careers in space, exploration, and colonization because they believed humans were destined to dominate the galaxy. Nari had accomplished something unprecedented in military history. She had won a war through pure psychological manipulation without firing a shot or commanding a single battle. The enemy had defeated themselves by trying to use methods that only made their opponents stronger. The final irony was that the Veltari would never fully understand what had happened to them. Their logical minds would continue searching for scientific explanations for human behavior that defied all their theories. They would never realize that the most powerful weapon in the war had not been technology or strategy, but simple human creativity and determination. As June prepared to leave Nari's quarters, he looked one more time at the brand on her arm. The symbol that had been burned into her flesh as a mark of enemy ownership had become the focal point of human victory in a galactic war. She had told the Veltari that every human who saw the brand would understand its true meaning. Not that she belonged to them, but that she had beaten them so completely they had to mark their failure permanently on her body. That prediction had proven more accurate than even she could have imagined. The war was ending, and humanity had won not through superior weapons or tactics, but through an unbreakable spirit that could transform any suffering into strength. The galaxy would remember this conflict as proof that humans were a species that could not be conquered or controlled by any force in the universe. Nari sat quietly by the window watching the stars and knowing that her sacrifice had not only saved her own life, but had changed the destiny of her entire species. The brand on her arm would always be there as a reminder of what one determined human could accomplish when faced with impossible odds. Tomorrow would bring peace, but tonight belonged to the memories of 18 prisoners who had turned their captivity into the foundation of human victory. The marking phenomenon would live on in legend and reality, shaping the future of humanity among the stars. 3 weeks after the interrogation, Commander June found himself reading intelligence reports that made him question everything he thought he knew about modern warfare. The psychological impact of Nari's escape was spreading through both human and alien forces in ways that traditional military doctrine had never anticipated. The story of the branded soldier had grown far beyond the simple facts of 18 prisoners escaping from an alien facility. Human soldiers throughout the galaxy were telling tales of the woman who had been marked by the enemy, but turned their own symbol into a weapon of resistance. Each telling added new details and made the legend more powerful. Recruitment numbers had increased by 40% in the Three sectors where the story was most widely known, young men and women were joining the military, specifically because they had heard about Nari and wanted to serve under commanders who understood the power of human determination. The escape had become a symbol of hope that was inspiring an entire generation of fighters, but the effects were not limited to human forces. Intelligence networks were reporting strange changes in Veltari behavior patterns across multiple prison facilities. The aliens had implemented new protocols for handling captured humans that showed clear signs of fear and uncertainty about their previous methods. June reviewed a classified report from deep space reconnaissance teams that had intercepted Veltari military communications. The alien commanders were having heated debates about something they called the marking phenomenon. Several facilities had stopped using branding procedures entirely, while others had requested additional security forces to prevent potential outbreaks. The most significant change was in how the Veltari treated their human prisoners, where before they had used systematic torture and psychological pressure to break resistance, now they were handling captives with something that looked almost like caution. Some prison camps had even released human prisoners rather than risk whatever mysterious process might create more marked ones. Neri had been assigned to a new position as a specialist in psychological warfare operations. Her unique understanding of both human and alien psychology made her invaluable for developing new strategies against Veltari forces. She spent her days training other soldiers in advanced resistance techniques and analyzing enemy behavioral patterns. When June visited her at the training facility, he found her working with a group of 20 young recruits who hung on her every word as she explained methods for maintaining mental strength under extreme pressure. The branded symbol on her arm was clearly visible as she demonstrated hand signals and coded communication techniques. The recruits looked at Nari with a mixture of respect and awe that went far beyond normal military hierarchy. They genuinely believed they were learning from someone who possessed special knowledge gained through direct connection with alien technology. The myth had become more powerful than the reality in their minds. After the training session, June spoke privately with Nari about the ongoing effects of her psychological operation. "Any regrets about what you started?" he asked, as they walked through the corridors of the military base. Nari stopped beside a window that looked out over the training grounds where hundreds of new soldiers were practicing combat exercises. "This mark was supposed to be my shame," she said quietly, rolling up her sleeve to expose the Veltari brand. Instead, it became the symbol of human victory over alien psychology. Every enemy soldier who sees it now knows that their methods do not work on us the way they thought. The brand had indeed become a powerful symbol throughout human space. Soldiers wore replica patches and tattoos not because they glorified torture, but because they represented the unbreakable nature of human spirit. The enemy's own mark had been transformed into humanity's banner of defiance against alien oppression. June had seen the psychological warfare reports that showed how effective this transformation had been. Veltari forces were becoming increasingly reluctant to engage in close combat with human units that displayed the branded symbol. The aliens had come to associate the mark with unpredictable and dangerous human behavior, but there was something else happening that worried military intelligence analysts. The other 17 prisoners who had escaped with Nari were showing signs of believing their own legend. They spoke about special abilities and enhanced understanding of alien technology that they claimed to have gained during their captivity. These survivors had become minor celebrities within human military circles. They gave speeches about their experiences and trained new recruits in techniques they said had been revealed to them through their connection with the branded symbol. Some of them claimed they could sense alien presence from greater distances or understand Veltari communications without translation devices. The military command was divided on how to handle this situation. Some officers wanted to expose the truth and end what they saw as dangerous superstition. Others argued that the psychological benefits were too valuable to risk undermining, even if the beliefs were based on carefully constructed fiction rather than actual supernatural phenomena. Nari seemed unconcerned about these developments. When June asked her about the claims being made by her fellow escapees, she simply smiled and said that belief could be just as powerful as reality in warfare. What mattered was not whether the special abilities were real, but whether both human and alien forces thought they were real. The war itself was taking a different direction, as both sides adapted to the new psychological landscape. Human forces had become more aggressive and fearless, inspired by stories of soldiers who could turn enemy torture into personal power. Veltari commanders were struggling to maintain discipline among troops who had been taught that humans were predictable and manageable opponents. Intelligence reports showed that some alien units were requesting transfers away from sectors where they might encounter marked humans. Other Veltari forces had begun using different tactics that avoided capturing prisoners altogether, rather than risk creating more of the mysterious enhanced soldiers. The most dramatic change was in prisoner exchange negotiations that had been standard practice throughout the war. The Veltari were now offering much better terms for human captives and processing exchanges more quickly than ever before. They seemed eager to get human prisoners out of their facilities before any marking events could occur. Nari had achieved something that no conventional military strategy could have accomplished. She had changed the fundamental nature of the conflict from a war of technology and resources into a war of psychology and perception. It was a battlefield where human creativity and adaptability gave them significant advantages over their more rigid alien opponents. As June watched her work with the new recruits, he realized that the young soldier had become something unprecedented in military history. She was simultaneously a real person with documented experiences and a living legend whose story was reshaping the entire war. The line between truth and mythology had blurred beyond recognition. The brand on her arm would always be there as a permanent reminder of what she had endured and what she had accomplished. But more importantly, it had become proof that sometimes the greatest victories came not from avoiding defeat, but from transforming it into something the enemy never saw coming. 6 months after her escape, Nari had created a new reality where human prisoners were no longer seen as liabilities, but as potential weapons waiting to be activated. The Veltari had learned too late that underestimating human psychology and resilience could turn their own methods against them in ways they never imagined possible. 8 months after Naris escaped, the war between humanity and the Veltari Empire had transformed into something neither side had expected when the conflict began. Human military strategists were reporting tactical advantages they had never possessed before, while alien commanders struggled with psychological problems that their training had not prepared them to handle. Commander June stood in the main briefing room of the military headquarters, studying maps and reports that showed the dramatic shift in how battles were being fought across multiple star systems. The traditional patterns of engagement had been completely disrupted by the ongoing effects of what intelligence analysts now called the marking phenomenon human forces were displaying, levels of aggression and fearlessness that surprised even their own commanders. Soldiers who had once been cautious about capture and imprisonment were now volunteering for dangerous missions behind enemy lines. Some units were specifically requesting assignments that would put them at high risk of being taken prisoner by Veltari forces. The psychological impact was measurable in concrete military statistics. Human casualties from combat stress and fear-related incidents had dropped by 60% in sectors where the marked soldier stories were most widely known. Desertion rates had fallen to the lowest levels in the entire 3-year history of the war. More significantly, surrender rates among human forces had virtually disappeared completely. Even when facing overwhelming odds and certain capture, human soldiers were choosing to fight to the death rather than be taken alive. This change in behavior was forcing Veltari commanders to adapt their tactics in ways that often put them at disadvantage on the alien side. The situation was far different. Intelligence intercepts showed that Veltari military leadership was dealing with unprecedented challenges to their authority and effectiveness. Prison facility commanders were requesting transfers to other duties rather than risk exposure to whatever process created marked humans. Several major prison camps had been closed entirely and their human captives transferred to facilities that specialized in quick processing and exchange rather than long-term detention. The Veltari were essentially admitting that they could no longer safely hold human prisoners for extended periods without risking unknown consequences. The most dramatic evidence of alien fear came from battlefield behavior patterns that had never been observed before. Veltari forces were avoiding capture of human prisoners even when tactical situations would normally have made such captures valuable. Instead, they were killing human soldiers outright or allowing them to escape rather than bring them to detention facilities. June reviewed a particularly disturbing intelligence report about a Veltari commander who had been court-martialed by his own forces for refusing direct orders to establish a new prison facility. The alien officer had argued that the risks of creating more marked humans outweighed any potential intelligence benefits from interrogating captured soldiers. The 17 other survivors from Naris' escape had become central figures in this psychological transformation. Each of them had been promoted and given special assignments that utilized their supposed enhanced abilities. Whether these abilities were real or imagined had become irrelevant, too. Their effectiveness as symbols and leaders, Private Lee Min-ho, one of the escaped prisoners, had become a specialist in infiltration missions behind enemy lines. His success rate was remarkable, and he attributed his abilities to insights gained during his captivity. Other Veltari intelligence networks seemed unable to detect or counter his operations effectively. Sergeant Park So-young, another survivor, had developed a reputation for predicting alien tactical movements with uncanny accuracy. Unit had avoided 3 major ambushes and successfully counterattacked Veltari forces in situations where conventional intelligence would have led to defeat. The military command had stopped questioning whether these enhanced abilities were real or psychological. The results spoke for themselves. Human forces were winning engagements at rates that exceeded all previous performance metrics, regardless of the explanation for their success. Nari herself had been promoted twice and was now working directly with high command on strategic psychological operations. Her understanding of Veltari behavior patterns had proven invaluable for predicting enemy responses to various human tactics and propaganda efforts when June met with her to discuss the latest developments. He found her in her new office, surrounded by maps, charts, and analysis reports that covered every aspect of the ongoing war. Her branded arm was clearly visible as she pointed to different tactical situations and explained how alien psychology could be exploited for human advantage. The war is changing faster than either side can adapt to, Nari explained as she showed June intelligence summaries from the past month. The Veltari built their entire military doctrine around the assumption that they understood human behavior and could predict our responses to their tactics. But now they are dealing with human forces that do not follow the patterns their scientists established, soldiers who see capture as an opportunity rather than a threat, prisoners who might become more dangerous after being tortured rather than being broken by the experience. The psychological warfare had created a feedback loop that was strengthening itself with each new engagement. Human soldiers, who believed in the power of the marked symbol, fought with greater determination and achieved better results. These successes reinforced the belief system and inspired even more dramatic displays of courage and aggression Veltari forces. Meanwhile, were becoming increasingly demoralized by their inability to understand or counter human behavior that violated all their scientific models. Some alien units were reporting reduced combat effectiveness due to uncertainty about how to handle human opponents who seemed to welcome rather than fear capture. The most significant development was happening at the highest levels of both military commands. Human leadership was beginning to design strategies specifically around the psychological advantages. They had gained, entire battle plans were being built on the assumption that Veltari forces would react with fear and confusion to certain types of human behavior. The aliens were making corresponding changes in the opposite direction, Veltari. Strategic planning now included extensive provisions for avoiding the creation of marked humans and minimizing exposure of their forces to the psychological effects of the marking phenomenon. June studied a classified report about peace negotiations that had been initiated by Veltari diplomatic channels for the first time since the war began. The aliens were apparently interested in discussing terms for ending the conflict rather than continuing what had become an increasingly unpredictable and dangerous situation for their forces. "Do you think they will actually surrender?" Nari asked when June mentioned the diplomatic initiatives. "Not surrender exactly," Nari replied, "but they might be willing to accept a settlement that gives humanity. Most of what we have been fighting for the Veltari are logical creatures, and logic tells them that this war is no longer winnable using their traditional methods." She pointed to a chart showing Veltari resource allocation over the past 6 months. The aliens were spending increasing amounts of money and personnel on psychological warfare countermeasures and prisoner facility security rather than on offensive military operations. This shift in priorities was weakening their overall strategic position. The marking phenomenon had essentially created a new type of weapon that the Veltari could not counter or neutralize. Human prisoners were no longer sources of intelligence and psychological advantage for the enemy. Instead, they had become potential threats that required expensive and complex containment procedures. More importantly, the legend of the marked soldiers had given humanity something that had been missing from their war effort: a sense of inevitable victory rather than desperate survival. Young recruits joined the military believing that humans possess special advantages over their alien enemies. This confidence translated into better performance in every aspect of military operations. Nari had accomplished something that conventional weapons and tactics could never have achieved. She had changed the fundamental psychology of the entire conflict, turning human disadvantages into advantages and alien strengths into weaknesses. The brand on her arm had become more than just a symbol of personal resistance. It was now the focal point of a transformation that was reshaping the war and possibly determining its ultimate outcome in ways that neither side had anticipated when the fighting began. Commander June stared at the alien symbol burned into Nari's arm and felt his anger drain away like water from a broken cup. The Veltari insignia was perfectly carved into her flesh with lines so precise they looked like they had been cut by a machine rather than burned by fire. He had seen many torture victims during the war, but nothing like this. Nari kept her arm extended toward him, showing the brand without shame or fear. Her dark eyes met his gaze directly, and June could see something burning there that made him understand why she had been silent. It was not shame or trauma that had kept her quiet. It was rage so pure and controlled that it seemed to glow like a cold flame in the depths of her soul. The young soldier began to speak in that same quiet, steady voice that somehow filled the entire white room. "You asked me to act like a soldier, Commander. So let me tell you what a real soldier does when the enemy tries to break her spirit. For 6 long months, I sat in there, prison cells, while they used every method they knew to make me talk." June slowly sat back down in his chair, his legs feeling weak as he tried to process what he was seeing and hearing. The brand was not a mark of collaboration, as he had feared. It was something far more significant and terrible than he could have imagined. They wanted our military codes. Nari continued, her fingers tracing the raised edges of the brand without showing any pain. They wanted to know where our hidden bases were, located on the outer colonies. They wanted the names of our spies and the details of our battle plans. They tried everything they could think of to make me give them this information. The commander listened in growing amazement as Nari described the months of torture she had endured. Physical pain that would have killed most people. Psychological warfare designed to destroy her sense of reality. Drugs that made her see terrible visions of her family and friends being hurt. The Veltari had used every weapon in their arsenal against her mind and body, but I gave them nothing. Nari said with quiet pride. Not a single code number, not one base location, not even my real name or rank. I told them I was just a cook from a supply ship and stuck to that story, no matter what they did to me. For 6 months. Commander. I held the line like a real soldier is supposed to do. June felt a chill run down his spine as he began to understand the true meaning of the brand. The Veltari were logical, creatures who did everything for a specific purpose. They did not waste time on meaningless cruelty or random acts of violence. If they had taken the time and effort to burn their own symbol into a prisoner's flesh, it meant something important. So, they decided to make an example of me, Nari explained. The alien commanders called it a special ceremony that would be broadcast to all the other human prisoners in the facility. They said if I would not serve their cause by giving them information, then I would serve it by showing other humans what happened to those who refused to cooperate. The branding ceremony had been held in the main courtyard of the prison camp, where all the other human captives could see what was happening. Nari was brought out in chains and forced to kneel in front of a metal device that glowed red-hot with alien technology. The Veltari commander gave a speech about human stubbornness and the price of defying the Empire. They expected me to scream and beg, and finally break down, Nari said with a slight smile that made June feel cold inside. Instead, I looked directly into the camera they were using to record everything, and I smiled at them, just like I am smiling at you right now. Then I told them something that made their blood run cold. The young soldier leaned forward across the metal table, bringing her face closer to June's. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but every word hit him like a physical blow. I told them that every human who saw this brand would know what it really meant. Not that I belonged to them, but that I had beaten them so completely, they had to resort to marking their failure permanently on my body. June felt his breath catch in his throat as the full implications of what she was saying began to sink in. Nari had not just endured torture and branding. She had turned the enemy's own psychological weapon against them by reframing its meaning in a way that would inspire rather than terrify other human prisoners. Veltari had made a critical error in their understanding of human psychology. They thought that seeing one of their fellow soldiers branded with the enemy symbol would break the spirits of the other prisoners. Instead, Nari had made sure it became a symbol of resistance and unbreakable human will. After the branding was finished, Nari continued. They moved me to a different section of the prison. This was where they kept prisoners. They considered broken beyond any further use. These inmates had more freedom to move around because the aliens thought they were no longer dangerous. It was the biggest mistake the Veltari could have made in this new section. Nari had begun the most dangerous part of her plan. She started making contact with other human prisoners who had been tortured but not completely broken. She could not speak to them directly because the aliens monitored all conversations, but she developed a complex system of taps and hand signals based on old military codes. Slowly and carefully, she built a network of communication throughout the prison facility. She identified which guards were careless and which security systems had weaknesses. She mapped out the entire layout of the complex and figured out the timing of patrol schedules. All of this information was passed along to her fellow prisoners through her secret communication system. The Veltari understood individual psychology, Nari explained, but they did not understand how humans work together as a team. They saw us as separate, broken individuals, rather than as soldiers who could form a unit and fight back when given the right leadership and information. Over several weeks, Nari had identified 17 other prisoners who still had the will and strength to attempt an escape. These were soldiers who, like herself, had been tortured extensively, but had not given up their core identity as human fighters. She carefully selected each one based on their skills and mental state. The escape plan itself was brilliant in its simplicity. Nari had noticed that the alien guards became lazy and inattentive during certain shifts. She had also discovered that the transport ships used to bring supplies to the prison were often left unguarded for short periods of time. On the night of the escape, everything went exactly according to plan. The selected prisoners overwhelmed their guards at precisely the right moment. They seized weapons and fought their way to the transport bay, where Nari used knowledge gained from months of observation to start one of the alien ships. But Commander June was experienced enough to know that even the best plans rarely worked perfectly, especially when they involved 18 weakened prisoners fighting their way through an alien military facility. There had to be more to the story than what Nari was telling him. "How did you really do it?" he asked bluntly. 18 prisoners, some of them injured, managing to steal a ship and fly through enemy-controlled space back to human territory without being intercepted. It sounds impossible even with perfect planning and execution. Nari was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her words carried a weight that made the air in the room feel heavy and oppressive. "Because I made sure the Veltari wanted us to escape, Commander. I made them more afraid of keeping us than of letting us go." The true genius of her plan was about to be revealed, and June realized that everything he thought he understood about the escape was only the beginning of a much larger and more complex operation.